I'm Gwen Hill from Pine Ridge Baptist Church Sunday School Department Ladies Class, and we're studying Daniel. We are in chapter 3. We are to start in verse 19 today, but I want to back up to it's still chapter 3, but up here in verse 15, the last part of 15, Nebuchadnezzar has erected a statue on the plain of Dura. It is 90 foot tall, it's 6 foot wide, I think I got that right, and it is clad in gold. It is a very impressive thing. There is multitudes of people around. There is the king on his throne. All of his army, the top of his army would be around him. His counselors would be around him. And all of the leaders of the people are in the crowd looking up at him and looking up at the statue. There's an orchestra there. They have been told anytime the orchestra sounds, when the orchestra sounds, they're to bow down to the ground and worship this statue. It is a test of fidelity to the king. It is, in fact, worship to the king. And when I was going over this with you the last time we met, I felt in chapter 3, verse 15, on the very last part, Nebuchadnezzar's angry, and he's talking to 3 Hebrew young men on the subject that they did not bow before the statue. And he has been angry. Whether he retains all of the anger or not at this point, he's still angry. And he asks them, what God is there that can deliver you out of my hands? And the God is a little g, what God can. But actually what he's saying there is very telling. And I'm sorry I didn't bring this up last time we met. He is really putting himself above even the gods that he claims, because they can't even take him, these young men, out of his hands. It's beyond saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, your God can't take you out of my hands. He even says his gods can't. So he is really pumped up. He is really thinking that he is something special. He's really putting himself forward as the deity here. When we get angry, we have high thoughts of ourselves, don't we? Okay, so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him after he said that. They're saying, we're not going to. We're not going to bow down before your statue and, in essence, worship you. We're not going to do it. Now, they were more politically correct than I was just then. But they said, no, we're not going to. No. Furthermore, when he threatened them with the fiery furnace, they said, furthermore, if our God wanted to, he could save us from that. And even if he doesn't save us from that, we're still not going to worship you, your idol, your statue. We belong to Jehovah. We belong to Yahweh. And we will worship only him. So Daniel chapter 3 verse 19. When Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and his facial expression was altered toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. He's mad. He is in a rage. In our day and time, you've heard of road rage? He is, as my mother used to say, he's lost his towel. He is beyond himself. He doesn't like to hear no. He doesn't like to hear I can't. He doesn't like to hear anything that is different from what he wants and what he decrees. And these three young men have the temerity to say no to him, and he is enraged. So he says, that's not hot enough, get it hotter. So some of the slaves would have come out with the bellows to blow while others throwed in more fuel in the thing, and they would have gotten that thing hot as could be. Have you ever, as a child, backed up to a warm morning stove, to a coal stove or a fireplace? And you know, if you kept feeding tinder into it, kept feeding stuff into it, how at the old warm morning coal stoves used to get hot. Even the flue would get hot and it would get glow. That's how hot that thing was. You got to where when you were wanting to warm, but you wanted to get close, but not too close, you'd put your hand up to shield you from the heat. It was hotter than that. He had that thing rolling. That took a little bit of time. What do you think it was doing to those three young men to watch that and to know that's your future? Unless God does something mighty, that's your future. Do you hear their inward prayers? In verse 20, he, Nebuchadnezzar, commanded certain valiant warriors who were in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to cast them into the furnace of the blazing fire. I don't think these men were resisting at this point. They may have been, but I don't think they were. But he gets men, valiant men. That means warriors. That means men who have fought not only for Nebuchadnezzar, but maybe beside Nebuchadnezzar. Trusted men. Men whose loyalty that he did not question at all to perform this for him. Tie them up, boys, and do it well. Then these men were tied up. They were tied up in their trousers and their coats, their caps, and other clothing, and they were cast into the furnace of blazing fire. For this reason, because the king's command was urgent and the fire had been made extremely hot, the flame of the fire slew those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up. A commentator that I follow, he looked this up in an extraneous book, and he said that the phrasing here means that the flames were shooting out of the vents of that oven as far as 45 feet. These valiant men who followed Nebuchadnezzar's every move and every order died in the process of carrying out those orders. As they heaved those three young men into the fire, they themselves fell down dead. So these bound men, dressed in their finest robes, because they would have put on their finest robes to go to this event, were thrown into the furnace. Tied up. Verse 24, then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded, and he stood up in haste, and he said to his high officials, was it not 3 men we cast bound into the midst of the fire? And they replied to the king, certainly, O king. And he said, well, look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm, and the appearance of the fourth is like the son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar is sitting back safely, but he's watching this tableau as it goes about, and he sees his men throw those 3 young men into the furnace, and he sees his men fall down dead. And then he kind of squints his eyes and looks. He is still enraged, and he wants to see these three men burn. So from his vantage, I don't know how much or how little he can see, but he sees enough to know that there's four in there, not three. He looks in there expecting to see a fiery death of three men who are bound and wiggling around as they went through death's agony. If they were going to succumb to this fire, they would have been dead before their bodies even hit the ground. It was that hot. They would have disintegrated. But in the midst, in the very center of the fire, where it should have been the hottest, he is able to discern that there are the three men that he put in walking around, but there's a fourth. Now, what would make him think the fourth was likened to the Son of God? Your holy imagination is what is required. Jesus is light, and even in the middle of fire, I think the light of Jesus Christ would shine brightly, because I believe that's who that is, a pre-incarnate Jesus Christ. I have a Jerusalem Bible, study Bible, and it has in this portion of Scripture, it has a song that Azariah is singing, where he's praising God for everything God has done for him. It is amazing. It is amazing. These young men said, we're not going to bow. We're not going to bow. Our God is powerful enough to save us if he wants to. But if he doesn't, that's okay. We still trust him. We still follow him. We still worship him. And Jesus stands in the middle of them. Nebuchadnezzar's anger's gone, replaced by wonder and by fear and by amazement. He's looking. In verse 26, then Nebuchadnezzar came near the door of the furnace of the blazing fire, got off his desk, went down the steps, walked close, as close as he could get, probably shadowed his face as much as he could, and still can't take his eyes off the four men walking in the fire. And he shouts. Nebuchadnezzar came near the door of the furnace of the blazing fire, and he responded and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. Over the roar of the fire, over the crackle of the burning wood product that's in there that's feeding the fire, he calls out to the three he knows. Come out of the fire and come to me. In verse 27, the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's high officials gathered around and saw in regard to these men that the fire had no effect on their bodies of these men, nor was the hair of their heads singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had the smell of even fire even come upon them. Good servants, these three men came forth out of the furnace. They walked up to the king and stood before him as he had asked. And all of the governors and the counselors and the Chaldeans who before was wanting to see them burn, baby, burn, they're all there. They are also amazed. And they handle them. They reach out and touch their clothing. And some are smelling at their hair. And they're adjusting their turbans, or they're looking at their turbans, and they're fingering and looking and smelling. And they can't detect that these men have been anywhere near a fire, much less in the midst of one like the one that is still burning. You know, these men faced the challenge, and they were in the midst of the fire. Do you know what they will remember? The fourth man that they walked with. Have you ever thought, why did Nebuchadnezzar not ask for the fourth man to come forward? First of all, he recognized that he was supernatural. He doesn't have any control over the supernatural, no power over the supernatural. That fourth man also was protecting the three that he put in the fire. And they were all able to do something that Nebuchadnezzar knew was a miracle. He just got through seeing a miracle. He doesn't have enough power to tell the fourth man, come out of the fire. How amazing. In verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him." All of those are capitals. "Violating the king's command and yielded up their bodies so as not to worship any god except their own God." He said, I have never thought about a God that strong, that mighty, that could protect, such as your God can. He is amazing. It's amazing. You put your faith in him and he didn't let you down. He doesn't want you to serve any God except himself. This God is amazing. And then verse 29, Nebuchadnezzar says, "Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to a rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way." And the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the providence of Babylon. He was amazed. God, not even the smell of the fire was on them. Nebuchadnezzar, if we look at in Revelations, which we just finished studying, Nebuchadnezzar is like the Antichrist in certain ways. Trying to force the whole world into one religion, one idolatry. He even erected a statue that the whole world is to worship, as the Antichrist does in Revelation. The fiery furnace is like the great tribulation. The Jewish boys went through the tribulation, but God was with them and saved them. And another thing, Daniel wasn't there, kind of like the church in Revelation. They didn't go. The church doesn't go through tribulation as well. The servants of the Most High God, Nebuchadnezzar realized that these men served the true God, the God Most High. And it makes a huge impact on his life. But we don't think it made a lasting, huge enough. But he still has life, and he still has a chance. So let's go to chapter 4 and see what happens to Nebuchadnezzar. God has a lot going on in his plan for this man's life, and he has a lot more for Daniel. We're not going to hear about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego after this, but they prosper. The king made sure they did. Can you imagine the witness? Can you imagine the witness? You see, at Christmas, we talk about 3 wise men coming from the east. Many think that those wise men, their ancestry, knew these 3 young men and knew Daniel and knew the Most High God. Are you a good witness? We need to be. This earth is in so much turmoil, and we serve such a wonderful God. And the world needs to know Him. So share Him this week. See you later.